The train whistle cut the morning clean, a bright knife across Sagebrush Bend. Dust leapt from the street in red veils. Men called prices for beans and flour. A hot bread smell drifted out of Cobb's General, heavy as a hand on the back of your neck. Nora Bell stood by a crate of apples with a wicker basket on her arm. Her cotton dress fit where it had to and pulled where it did not. A gray ribbon tied at her waist like it was doing its best. She did not hide herself. She shifted her weight to keep the dust from settling on her shoes and watched the sunlight flash on tin roofs. She laid a small stack of handbills on the crate. The top one read in her neat, careful print letters ledgers lessons. She lifted her chin and tried the words she had practiced. "I can read contracts," she said to Mr. Cobb without pushing. "I write letters. I teach children their letters if folks have no time." Mr. Cobb kept stenciling a flour sack until the last letter, then looked up with a grin that showed a gold tooth. "You write menus, do you, Miss Bell?" he said loud enough to reach the porch. "Looks like you have studied them plenty." A couple of rail hands snorted. Someone coughed to hide a laugh. From the ribbon stall, Mags Porter sang out sweet as vinegar, bless her. Recipes, too. She is a walking cookbook. Nora smoothed a handbill with her thumb. The ink had dried smooth and dark. She would not answer the joke. She had learned that much. "I worked at St. Bridget Mission," she said. "I can read deeds and tax books. I can keep a freight ledger straight." "Tax books will fold under you, honey," a rail hand called. The men near him brayed like colts. A boy of 10 stared and whispered to his brother, "Look at her." Nora felt her basket strap bite into her shoulder. She shifted and turned away, and that was when a man's shoulder glanced off hers. The basket tilted. Glass clinked. Bottles of ink fell and broke. Black spread in the dust like spilled night. Pens and paper skittered. 2 carrots and a heel of bread rolled into a boot print. She went to her knees. The heat of the street came up through her skirt. She reached fast for the paper as if it might save its clean edges. Laughter ran behind her like water in a ditch. "Watch your step," someone called. "Ground is shaking." Her fingers trembled and left ink on a page. She whispered to the dirt, "Do not look." A shadow fell over her, cool as a door closing. "Ma'am," a voice said steady and low. "Are you hurt?" She looked up into a shape that filled the morning. The man was tall, his shirt stretched honest across a back that knew work. His hat threw his eyes in gray shade, but she saw that those eyes did not laugh and did not pity. They saw what was in front of them and waited. 3 children stood behind him in a tight row. The eldest boy kept his mouth shut and watched. The smaller boy twisted a piece of twine around his fingers and made a loop, then broke it, then looped it again. A little girl held a rag doll by one leg and sucked on her lip like it might help. The man held out a hand. It was big, scratched, pale, in places nicked and healed, and it had a patience to it. "Let me help you." Nora laid her hand in his because his voice left no place for shame. His palm wrapped her fingers and set her on her feet without hurry. The ease of it surprised her. He bent, picked up one of her handbills from the dirt, and smoothed the corner with that same patient thumb. He read every line. He did not skim. "You teach letters," he said. "And keep books," she answered. He nodded once. "I need both." He tipped his head slightly toward the children. For them, for the ranch. Nora felt eyes on her from the porch and the doorway and the alley. The dust lifted and settled on her hem. "I do not want your pity." "I am not offering it," he said close enough that only she would hear. "I am hiring." She faced him then. His jaw was rough with a day's growth. A small white scar cut his eyebrow. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbow and his forearms were strong and quiet. "What is your name?" she asked. "Asa Grady," he said. "Grady Basin Ranch." "Nora Bell," she said. He nodded like she had given him something useful. "I pay regular. I do not pay slow. You would live out by the creek. There is a room. You eat with the children." She looked past him at the small boy's twine. He had made a knot that would not hold. He kept trying it anyway. The eldest boy did not blink. The little girl's doll had a button eye that was not sewn on straight. The eye stared hard at a boot heel. She swallowed and said, "I will need to collect my things." "You have them," he said, and his mouth ticked toward the basket. He stooped for the cracked bottle and set it in the grass away from the ink slick. Then he picked up her basket by the strap and lifted it as if it did not trouble him, then turned it so the strap lay across her shoulder. The weight settled different. It fit. Mr. Cobb cleared his throat like gravel. Mags Porter pretended to tie ribbon. The train clanked once from the siding. Asa turned his head toward the street, where a tired buckboard stood with 2 gray horses. "We are going now," he said. "If you are going." Nora held his gaze for the space of one breath. She nodded. "I am going." He did not smile. He looked like a man who counted fences in his head and knew what needed mending. He lifted the little girl into the wagon and set her careful on the bench. The eldest boy climbed in without help. The smaller one handed Nora the doll by the ankle. "She has a name," he said. "What is it?" Nora asked as she stepped up. "Button," he said. "That suits her." Asa reached for Nora's forearm to steady her as she climbed. His hand did not squeeze. It guided. When she sat, she saw the ink on her thumb pressed into the weave of her skirt. A small stamp. Proof she had been here. Proof she had been seen. He took the reins and clicked his tongue once. The wagon rolled. The horses pulled steady. The wheel cut through the wet ink on the dirt and drew a long black line from the crate of apples to the street. The line kept going until the ink thinned and the dust took it. They passed the church where the bell rope hung in a neat loop. They passed the livery that smelled like sweet rot and hay. Nora kept her hands in her lap so she would not wipe the ink on the wood. She watched the town slide by like a picture book turned slow. The eldest boy sat with his fists on his knees, not looking at her, which was his way of looking. The smaller boy wound the twine around his thumb and pulled it tight to see it blush. The little girl leaned her head against the bench and blinked at Nora, and for a moment Nora thought the child would cry. She did not. She let go of the doll and stretched her hand toward Nora's sleeve. Nora set her palm open. A small hand, warm and sticky, found the center of it and stayed. Asa kept his eyes on the road. The brim of his hat made a small shade for his mouth. He did not speak. The street widened. The houses thinned. Cottonwoods took the wind in their leaves and hissed a little. Far off, a cloud shouldered up against the blue and made the light change. A loose plank on Cobb's roof clattered once and lay quiet. The buckboard rattled over a rut. The ink line behind them ran on in a straight stroke until it faded into dust. Nora breathed and kept her hand open for the child. Her thumbprint dried on her skirt, the black gone to gray. The road unrolled pale as a belt toward a wash of sage and a low run of purple hills. Beside her, the man's hand lay on the reins, brown and steady. The horses worked. The town fell behind quieter with each turn of the wheel. The long mark of ink on the street thinned and then was gone. Cottonwoods took the wind and whispered as the wagon left the last clapboard house behind. The creek flashed between reeds, a thin silver twist that kept its own counsel. Grady Basin Ranch lay out beyond a stand of mesquite, a long house of weathered boards with a deep porch and a yard tamped hard by boots and hooves. A clothesline ran from corner post to corner post, 2 shirts and a small dress moving like shy fish. Asa pulled the team to a stop. The gray horses blew and tossed their heads, then settled. He dropped from the seat and lifted Daisy with both hands. He set her on the porch as if the step might reach up and take her. Jonah climbed down without a word. Luke jumped and stumbled, grinning to hide it. Nora kept her skirt clear of the wheel and paused with one foot on the iron step. Asa put his palm under her forearm. He did not lift so much as guide. She found the plank with the ball of her foot and came down easy. Inside the doorway, the air held the cool of shade and the smell of coffee gone faint in the pot. The kitchen was plain and clean. A black stove sat fat and sure in the corner. On the table, a bowl of apples waited with a knife stuck point down in the cutting board beside them. The floorboards had been scrubbed. Their watermark showed the direction of a hand that worked until the job was done. Asa led her down a side hall and opened a narrow door. The room had a bed with a quilt in faded blues, a washstand with a cracked pitcher, a desk made from a plank and 2 sawhorses, and a shelf with empty space waiting for books. A small window faced the yard. Dust motes hung in a sheet of light and swam when she breathed. He looked at the room, not at her. It was a way to give a person privacy while standing 3 feet away. He said quiet the way he said most things. You take your meals with the children. Work starts with first light, lessons after breakfast, books for the ranch after that. Nora set her basket on the desk. The strap left a shallow red line on her shoulder. She rubbed at it once and let her hand fall. Yes, she said. He nodded. I will show you the account ledgers when the day is done. His eyes went to the window, to the yard, to the corner of the porch, where a hinge squeaked when the wind turned. If you need something, tell me. If you do not, that is fine too. She listened to the house. It breathed in its wooden way. From the front room came the steady knock of Jonah's heel on a chair leg. Luke said something in a rush, then hushed himself like he had learned that lesson the hard way. Daisy's voice was a small song that did not have words yet. Nora unpacked her satchel. She put a slate and chalk on the desk, a short stack of stitched booklets, an inkwell wrapped in cloth. She set her 3 best pens in a glass and lifted the 4th to the light. The nib had bent. She pinched it straight with her fingers and wiped the tiny smear of ink on her skirt where the hem would hide it. They gathered in the front room after the midday meal. The room carried a pattern of sun on the floor squares of warm light cut by the window frames. Jonah sat on a bench with his arms folded and his mouth set. Luke lay on his stomach and let his heels kick the air. Daisy stood by the window and watched chickens step and peck outside the fence. Nora did not claim the bench or the chair that had the look of a father's seat. She sat on the braided rug and let her skirt settle around her like a small gray bay. The heat of the floor came through the weave and into her legs. She opened a booklet made of hand-cut leather and linen pages. The first page held a drawing in pencil of a rabbit with long ears and eyes too big for its head. "Have you met this one?" she asked, and Luke rolled over and looked. "It runs fast," he said, as if that settled the matter. This one forgot how Nora said. She put a finger on the sketched nose. It tried. The legs would not listen. Jonah let out a breath that was not quite a laugh. "A rabbit that cannot run is dinner," maybe Nora said. Or maybe it remembers something else. She began to read. She did not explain. She let the words do their work. The rabbit got mocked by other rabbits. The rabbit learned to sit so still a hawk passed over without seeing it. The rabbit learned the creek, not the shore, was the safe road. The rabbit learned to climb the low branch of the mesquite tree, where the wind made a sound that covered the sound of breath. Luke inched closer without moving his knees. Jonah's folded arms loosened. Daisy's head came to rest against Nora's upper arm. Nora kept her voice even and warm. She pointed to the letters when the rabbit spoke and said them slow so the shape of the words joined the sound. She did not look to see if Asa was in the doorway. She did not need to in order to know he was near. The air changed when he stood in it. At the last page, the rabbit did not run or fight. It placed one foot in the creek and then the other and stepped into the water like it had known it all along. Nora closed the booklet. Luke exhaled like he had held something between his ribs and could finally set it down. Jonah looked at the doorway, and away a quick flick that meant he had seen his father and his father had seen him seeing. Nora gathered the papers. "Tomorrow we will write our names," she said. "Today we will learn a difference. There, they are." She wrote the 3 on the chalkboard that had been propped against a chair. The chalk squeaked once. She winced and smiled to show the wince was part of life and not a secret. Jonah read the first one right and stopped surprised that his mouth had taken that risk. He tried the second and got caught. Nora did not correct. She drew a small house over there and a set of stick figures over they are. Jonah looked at the figures and let the word out smooth the second time. He did not thank her. The way he sat said he had noticed the road had been made easier without calling him small. As the afternoon lifted, Nora's cough came up and left a scrape in her throat. She swallowed and went on. After the lesson, she carried the slates to the kitchen to wipe them clean. When she came back to the table, there was a small tin next to her cup. Inside lay slices of lemon packed in honey. No one was in the room. The honey had the shine of something that had been planned and not mentioned. She took a small spoonful and waited for the sting and the sweet. It went down and spread warm. She touched the tin with her fingertip. The lid clicked and she left it there. Later she stood in the doorway and spoke to Asa about the gate that caught and squealed when the wind leaned on it. She did not ask. She said plain that it woke Daisy when the night was thin. He grunted. That evening she heard a hammer tap and a hinge give one short cry and then go quiet forever. The work of the ranch pulled the day along by both hands. Asa took the boys to mend a gap in the fence where a steer had tested the post and found it forgiving. Nora walked the yard with Daisy and named things for her. Daisy pressed her fingers to the glass of the jar that held flour weevils on the pantry shelf. Nora said bug, and Daisy breathed it back as a puff of air on the first letter. Daisy tugged at the ribbon on Nora's dress and said blue. Nora laughed under her breath and said yes. When the sun had slid to a warm angle and shadows of fence rails striped the ground, Nora lifted a woven basket full of kindling. The pieces had been split short, but the basket was full and the handles cut into the pads of her hands. She took a step and the weight shifted. Her knee bumped a stone. The world tipped. The world. Wood slid and clacked. A hand caught her at the inside of the elbow. Her shoulder found a wide chest that kept its own balance no matter what leaned on it. One sliver of kindling hit the dirt and rolled. Asa's other hand took the basket by the rim and brought it back level. "You all right?" he asked. Nora looked up. His eyes were the color of a storm that had not made up its mind. She felt her face warm even as the air held a late heat. I misjudged the weight, she said. You are carrying more than most, he said with no tilt to the words. They stood longer than was needed, and then stepped back at the same time as if a breath had talked to both of them. He cleared his throat. Ask Jonah next time. He is strong enough and needs to prove it. Of course, she said. He turned toward the barn. His boots pressed the gravel and made small noises that sounded final and not unkind. Nora crouched, gathered the one stray stick, and put it back in the basket. She felt the echo of where his hand had steadied her for a while after. Evening laid its hand over the ranch. On the porch, Asa sat for a time with the ledgers open and his big finger tracing a column. He saw where numbers should have matched and did not. Nora stood beside the table and watched him see it. She did not speak. She set the bottle of ink near his right hand. He looked up and then down again, a small nod that said the help had been noted and would be matched with something of equal worth. The first stars came on, and the lamp inside the kitchen turned the windows into squares of gold. The children grew soft with sleep. The sound of their breathing stitched the rooms together. Nora took her cup to her small room and sat with the door open. She could hear the brush of Asa's sleeve and the quiet metal sound of a latch fixed at last. A wind from the south came late, warm and restless. It pushed at the line of cottonwoods and made the leaves show their pale undersides. The porch step creaked as Asa crossed it. Nora reached for the booklet with the rabbit and ran her palm over the cover. The leather had grown warm from her hand. In the barn, a hinge eased as someone checked it with oil. The air held the dim smell of hay and old smoke from a cook fire that had not been quite watched. A ladder leaned against a roof beam where a plank had shifted and needed nails. Outside, clouds pressed low on the far hills and made the distance look close. Nora blew out her lamp and lay down. The room kept a small light a square from the kitchen drifting along the floor. Her hands lay open on the quilt. She thought of the way Daisy's hand had curled in her palm in the wagon, and of Jonah scowling to keep the world from seeing his effort, and of Luke tying a knot that would not hold and trying again, because trying was the only way he seemed to know. She did not build a story out of it. She let the pieces lie where they were solid and ordinary and heavy enough to stay put. A gust moved through the yard and lifted the edge of the wash line. The shirts reached and fell. A door tapped and went still. In the tack room where saddles hung in a row and a blanket threw off the dry smell of horse, a small canvas bag swung on a peg. A glass vial inside it tapped once against a buckle, then settled back against the cloth. Thunder walked the ridgeline and took the breath out of the cottonwoods. The house felt it before the people did. A latch chattered once. The good hinge held its tongue. Then light cracked the dark open and stitched it shut again. The smell came last sharp and bitter, like a match struck under your nose. Nora sat up with her hand already reaching for the lamp. Daisy made a soft sound, a cat sound with no air in it. Across the hall, Jonah's bunk creaked. Luke's feet hit the floor with a thump too loud in the narrow room. Nora lit the lamp and kept her voice level. Coats, she said. Boots, quickly. She turned to Daisy and pressed her palm to the girl's chest. The rise and fall was shallow. The little mouth opened without getting much. The old fear in her eyes had no language. Another tear of light. The window flashed white. From the yard came a roar that was not wind. Fire took the barn roof in one gulp and spat it back in pieces. The horses screamed once and then went quiet the way trained animals go quiet when a man they trust tells them so. Asa was already on the porch. He was barefoot, shirt-buttoned, wrong hair flattened by sleep. He did not look at Nora long. He did not need to. Cellar, he said. Now. He was gone before the last letter landed. He ran toward the red light, shoulders low, and vanished into smoke. Rain hit the yard hard enough to bounce. The first drops turned to sheets. The lamp flame leaned and held. Nora gathered the children at the kitchen trap and pulled the ring. Wood lifted. Earth smell rose up cold and damp cool as the inside of a jar. She led them down narrow steps to the small space lined with shelves. Jars of peaches and beans watched with round glass eyes. A pair of quilts waited on a chest. She set Daisy on a folded blanket and touched her cheek. The girl's lips were pale. Jonah stood straight, fists tight against his sides as if he could be a post and hold the ceiling up. Luke looked at the lamp and at the ladder and back again, mouth working but saying nothing. Blankets, Nora said. Sit together. Stay put. She set the lamp on the shelf where it would not tip. She put her ear near Daisy's mouth and counted. The count felt wrong. She heard the rain like a herd on the kitchen floor above. Where is the medicine? Jonah asked. His voice had no wobble. He already knew he would not like the answer. "In my canvas bag," Nora said, and saw it hanging on a peg where Saddles slept. She looked at Daisy again. The small ribs moved too fast. The cheeks went gray. Nora took the lamp in her hand. "I will be back," she said. She touched Jonah's shoulder. It was a stone under her palm. "Hold the light if it dims. Keep her warm. Do not open the door for anyone but me or your father." She went up into the kitchen with one breath and into the yard with the next. The rain slapped her face. Her skirt drank water and got heavy. Mud tugged at her boots. Heat slapped her other cheek, the one turned toward the barn. The roof gaped. Sparks spun up and died in the wet. "Asa," she called, and the night threw her voice back half-size. A horse burst from the side door and ran into the rain, eyes rolling, nostrils red. Asa came behind it with a knife in his palm and a halter rope in the other. He cut the last knot on a tie post and turned for the next stall without a look behind him. "The bag," Nora shouted. He did not hear. The wind took it. She ran for the tack room where the door hung a little crooked. The smell inside was leather and mouse and smoke crawling under it. She lifted the lamp. The light licked the row of saddles and flashed on a buckle. The canvas bag swung on the peg, swinging like it had its own heart. She reached up, fingers slick, and got it down. The building groaned. A black shape let go of the rafters. The floor jumped. She froze for a heartbeat that felt like a long minute. Then a hard body took her from the side and turned her. A shoulder became a wall. Heat pressed through cloth. Something heavy hit Asa's back and bounced. He did not fall. The lamp flared and stuttered and held. "You all right?" he said into her hair. His voice was ground glass and gravel. "Yes," she said, and tasted smoke. "Daisy." He took the bag from her and shoved it into her hands. "Go." He did not ask again. He moved past her toward another tied horse, a dark rump quivering in the pen. He was a man built for steady work, but there was nothing slow in him now. He bent to a rope and came up with a snort, motioning the horse into the open like it was a dance he had taught it years ago. Nora ran. The rain tried to push her backward. The yard slid under her. She did not stop to wipe her face. She did not lift her skirt. She held the bag tight against her chest so the glass inside would not break. The cellar door was a small square in the kitchen floor. Her breath burned. She pulled the ring, climbed down, and set the lamp where it had been. Daisy lay with her eyes open and her mouth open, and not much coming from either. The boys had put a quilt over her. Jonah's jaw was clenched. Luke held the ragdoll button to his chest almost too tight. Nora found the vial by touch. The cork stuck and then gave. She tapped drops onto Daisy's tongue and kept her hand steady. The girl choked once and spit one drop back. Nora wiped it with her thumb and put a second drop behind it. "Breathe with me," she said. In. Out. She did not count. She showed. She breathed slow and wide and let the child see it and feel it through the hand that held her ribs. The sound in Daisy's throat shifted from whistle to rattle to something else. The something else was better. The storm worked at the house. Water fell from the stairs in thin lines. The lamp made a ring of gold on the dirt floor. Nora watched the skin at Daisy's throat where it met the collarbone. The tug there softened. The color crept back, a shy color that knew not to rush. When the door at the top of the steps opened again, the cellar felt too small for the size of the man who came down. Asa was wet to the bone. Smoke ringed him and lifted off him in strings. His hair stuck to his forehead. One sleeve was torn. His back was wrong under the shirt, a dark patch in the wet cloth where the beam had kissed him. He bent and put a large hand over the small rise of Daisy's belly. He did not push. He felt. The child looked at him and blinked, then took a breath that sounded like a breath should sound. Asa's hand lifted and fell with it. He let out a sound that was not a word. Nora reached for a towel and put it over his shoulders. He did not argue. He sat on the bottom step with his head down and his hands on his knees. The water ran off him and made a small river in the dirt that found a low place and stayed there. Luke edged along the shelf and set Button near Daisy's elbow and then stepped back like he had done something brave and did not want it noticed. They stayed until the first light got in at the cracks around the hatch, and the storm went north, growling as it went. When they climbed out, the yard was a gray wash. Steam rose off black timber and turned the air to a sour tea. The barn stood, but the roof did not. The posts were scorched. A charred beam lay in the mud like a rib. The paddock was empty. Hoof marks chewed the ground. The horses had gone to the back pasture and were safe if the fence held. Neighbors came as shapes in the mist hats, dripping mouths set. They carried buckets that had not been much use against lightning. They put them down and looked. Mrs. Ellery had a shawl pulled tight and a hard face that did not always belong to her. Mr. Cobb stood with one hand on his hip and the other on the brim of his hat like he could push guilt up under it and keep it. Mags Porter's ribbons did not care for weather. They hung limp and ashamed. Nora stood with Daisy on her hip and Asa's arm around her shoulders to keep the child in the lee of the man's body. His shirt stuck to his back. The cloth had stuck to his skin and pulled it up in a patch the size of Nora's hand. He did not shift away. His arm tightened when a gust came. Jonah stood to her left with his chin up. Luke pressed his side to her skirt without looking like he meant to. No one said anything useful. The rain left behind a white hiss in the grass and a smell like pennies. After a while, the neighbors began to move. Mr. Cobb picked up a stray halter and looped it on a fence post. Mrs. Ellery reached to touch Daisy's hair and stopped, then let her fingers fall. Mags found her voice and lost it. The picture of them, all of them together, got caught under the eye of the town and stayed there. Nora took Asa inside and set him in a chair. She cut the shirt up the back with kitchen scissors when the cloth would not let go. He did not flinch until the worst of the fabric had been peeled away. The skin under was reddened and blotted. She cleaned it with cool water, and her mouth went pinched against the sharp smell. He sat and stared at the edge of the table, his hands curled around his knees. "Thank you," she said, and heard how small the words were for what they had to carry. He looked at her once straight on and nodded. "You kept her breathing," he said. "We are even." They did not touch after that, except for the careful way she laid the clean cloth and tied it down with strips. He took in the pain and let it sit where it sat. She put the scissors away and washed her hands in the pan and shook them dry. 3 days later, the sky had washed itself clean and come back bright and thin. The barnyard still smelled wrong. Asa and Jonah worked at a support post while Luke carried nails in his palm and felt tall for it. Nora took a list in her pocket and a coin in her fist and rode the buckboard into town for an inkwell and paper. Cobb's General had sawdust on the floor and new sacks of flour stacked by the door. The bell over the jam chimed and forgot to stop. She stepped into the aisle where paper and string waited like old friends. She ran a fingertip over a stack of envelopes that would take a clean seal. She reached for a glass bottle with a round belly and a neat cork. 2 women passed behind her, voices lifted just enough to tip over the shelf. "He ran into fire for that big girl," one said the way a person remarks on weather. "Lost his sense after his wife," the other said. "Always did favor the heavy ones. She has him trust. Land makes a person bold." "Poor children," the first one said. "She will sit on one of them by mistake." Nora stood very still. Her list softened in her hand as if rain had found it. She could see the counter through the glass of the inkwell. Mr. Cobb's gold tooth flashed once when he smiled at a man buying nails. The bottle in Nora's fingers felt cold and slick. She put it back where it had been with care and turned without touching anything else. The bell over the door rang again, thin and bright in the clean air as she stepped into the sunlight. She did not look behind her. The list in her palm had folded into quarters without her telling it to. She held it tight until the crease cut into her skin. Dusk laid a thin copper edge on the fence rails. The yard still smelled wrong, a sour twist of wet ash under the hay. Nora carried her satchel to her room without noise. She folded 2 dresses and the stitched booklets and set them in neat layers. Her hands moved like she was taking inventory of breath. The rabbit booklet lay palm up on the desk. She touched the leather, then slid it back into the stack, then pulled it out again. She held it against her ribs and felt the weight of what it meant. She set it down on the desk. She left it. In the children's room, the quilts rose and fell. Luke had fallen asleep sideways. Jonah had a hand out from the covers as if he had started to reach for something and thought better of it. Button lay face up on Daisy's pillow with one eye staring wrong. Nora fixed the button with 2 quick stitches from the kit in her pocket. She pressed her lips to the rag cloth and straightened. The house creaked once, a small, old sound. She crossed the front room. The ledger sat on the table with a flat stone on top to keep the pages from curling. The stone had a white vein in it that ran like a river. She had traced it last night without meaning to. Tonight she did not touch it. She went to the door. The latch lifted and complained. The sound carried into the yard. Asa turned from the barn at the first click. His shirt stuck to his shoulders with sweat and weather. He crossed the yard in a straight line that pulled the distance tight. He stepped inside and closed the door with his palm like he could slow the world with a hand. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I think it is time I left," Nora said. She kept her eyes on the floor, on the clean strips between knots. "It is better for them. The boys hear things. Daisy will hear them soon enough. I will not be the reason they learn that kind of silence. Asa looked at her satchel, his jaw set. He looked at her and softened one small degree, because of voices that do not earn their say. Because those voices travel, she said. They will wait outside the schoolhouse. They will wait at the pump. They will follow your children. I'm not ashamed of who I am. I'm tired of being the lesson in other people's mouths. You think I settled, he said. I think you are good, she said. I think people will turn that into something crooked if I stay. The air between them filled and then thinned. He stepped forward once. She stepped back the length of a hand. His eyes were the color of wet gravel. The lamp on the sideboard put a small circle on his cheekbone and left the rest in shade. He reached for the latch. His hand closed over hers, not hard. His thumb found the top of her knuckle. His skin was warm and smelled of smoke and barnwood. They did not move. The house listened. Somewhere, a cricket started and stopped. Nora breathed in and felt the latch cool under her palm. She did not lift it. He did not let go. They stood like that until the breath changed shape in her chest. She slid her hand out and set it at her side. I will leave in the morning, she said, and her voice did not break. I will not wake them. He nodded once. It was not consent and not refusal. It was what a man does when the thing in front of him is a river and not a fence. He stepped aside. She went to her room and shut the door without a click. Morning came thin and quiet. The kitchen held its breath. The stove was cold. No one had put the coffee on. The house felt larger, as if it had shifted to hold more space than a body could use. On the table lay a single folded sheet. Cream paper thick. A corner carried a thumbprint of ink. Nora did not see it at first. She set her room key by the stove and turned to the door. Then she saw the paper and the careful line of script on the outside. Nora. She sat and opened it. The handwriting was square and patient, the way a man lays a fence line when no one is watching. Miss Bell, it began, then scratched out and started again. Nora, I am not made for many words. You carry them better than I do. I put this down because it is the only way I see clear. I put a woman in the ground. I put down soft mornings and warm pans, and thought they were buried with her. Then you set your books on my table and your hand on my girl's chest, and I saw all of it was still here. I do not want the shape people think I should want. I want a partner, not a picture. Someone who looks like home when I turn my head. Someone who knows the weight of a thing and carries it anyway. I was going to ask you to stay. I will ask you to stay only if you want it, and you know what I mean when I say I. The ink trailed into a blot. The last word lay open like a gate. Nora held the paper at her chest. The room moved and then steadied. She did not weep like a person who is hurt. The sound in her throat was low and clean. The feeling was like a window opened in a house that had been shut a season too long. She laid her palm over the place where his pen had paused as if she could warm the ink and make the line go on. She folded the letter once then again and slid it under the edge of the stone on the ledgers. The white vein on the rock lined up with the line where the paper disappeared. She stood and washed her face in the cold water in the basin and watched her cheeks come back to themselves. By noon, the sun had chased the last damp from the yard. The chicken coop roof still listed where the storm had tugged at it. Asa stood with a plank braced to his shoulder. He kept his eyes on the nail line. Nora climbed the ladder with a hammer in her hand and a scarf tied at her hair. The wood smelled of sap and dust. He held the plank. She set the first nail and drove it. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm settled into her wrist. A feather stuck to her cuff. She blew it away and it floated, then caught on a splinter and hung there. You are putting it on straighter than I did, he said. I am not afraid of crooked, she said. The words came light and found their place. He shifted his weight. The plank did not move. He looked out at the pasture and then up at her. If you keep teaching them, he said, and the air waited, I will learn how to be a husband to you. She stopped with the hammer mid-lift. Her lungs forgot the step between in and out and then remembered. Do you mean that, she asked. I do not say what I do not mean, he said. His eyes did not leave hers. She set the hammerhead on the nail head and felt the tiny circle meet. She drove the nail home. It sang against the wood. She climbed down and stood in front of him with her hands dusty and the scarf slipping. He did not reach to fix it. He let her fix it if she wanted to. Luke burst through the coop door and sent hens into a flurry. Are you getting married? He asked in a voice that was bigger than he was. Jonah came after, shoulders squared like he had arrived by accident. His ears had gone a little pink. He scuffed a toe at the threshold and did not step fully inside. Daisy waddled behind them and lifted both arms toward Nora. Mother, she said the word careful, like stepping stones across a stream. Nora crouched so she could meet their eyes. She brushed a smear of dust from Daisy's cheek with the back of her finger. "If that is what you want," she said. Luke whooped and then tried to swallow it. Jonah looked at his father and received a nod the size of a coin. He nodded back once and looked away. Daisy leaned into Nora's neck and made a small sound like a contented bird. Asa set his hand on Nora's shoulder, not shy and not heavy. Outside, the light shifted. Air tightened. From town thin over the sage and cottonwood, a bell began to ring. It rang again, clear and bright, as if a rope had found a hand. The bell kept on with a clear, simple note that carried across the sage and washed up against the porch. People came without being asked. They came because the sound drew them. They came because the last of the smoke had lifted and left a clean sky over Sagebrush Bend. The whitewashed chapel sat at the edge of town where the ground turned to gravel and the cottonwoods began. Sun lay in bright bars across the doorstep. Someone had swept the aisle. The air smelled like beeswax and dry hymnals. A ribbon trailed from a pew and made a small blue line on the floor. Nora stood outside the chapel door with her hands at her sides. She wore a blue dress that had waited in the cedar chest in Asa's house. It was simple and soft. The note pinned to it with an old brass straight pin, set in a hand she knew now as his, "For whoever makes this house full again." The cloth did not try to change her. It lay honest against her shoulders. Her hair was pinned under a plain scarf. The scarf had a single loose strand that the wind found and lifted. Jonah stood to her right chin-up shirt tucked as if he had done it with care, and then paid it no mind. Luke shifted foot to foot and kept one fist wrapped around an invisible rope. Daisy held Button by the leg and leaned her cheek into Nora's hip, then leaned away again like she was measuring distance. Asa waited at the front. His shirt was white because it had been scrubbed hard. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow because he was who he was. He looked like a man who had put his hands to heavy work that morning and would again by sundown. When Nora walked the aisle, the small sound of her shoes on wood kept time with the beat of her own heart. A murmur moved through the pews and then stilled. Mr. Cobb made a small show of straightening the scale that sat on the chapel table, where people sometimes weighed coins for the collection. The arm found level. Mags Porter twisted a ribbon around her finger and did not find words to tie it with. Nora reached Asa. He did not take her hand at once. He bowed his head and then lifted her hand with a care that was not shy. He pressed his mouth to her knuckles, a soft press that was not for show. The preacher read a short line from a book with a cracked spine. He looked at their faces and saw what was needed and kept the rest of his words. They spoke no vows that rolled like big stones. They said yes. They said I will. They let the room keep the echo. A little boy in the back pew asked a question in a whisper that sounded like thunder to his mother, and then went quiet. The bell rang once more as if it had heard what it needed. Asa turned to the children and put his hand palm up. 3 small hands, too, with dirt ground into the lines, one with a thread tied around the wrist, found his. Nora set her free hand over the top and felt all of it, the weight and the warmth and the work. When they stepped out into the light, the day widened to fit them. Hats came off. A few men nodded with slow approval like they were marking a good post set true and plumb. Mrs. Ellery pulled a clean handkerchief from her sleeve and blew her nose as if that were the sole purpose of the cloth. The wind carried a thin, sweet smell from the bakery. The world did not change shape. It accepted a new piece into its pattern and kept going. A year turned the hills from gold to green to gold again. The barn had a new roof. The old blackened boards that had been too cleanly charred to throw on a trash pile had been planed and sanded and set into a fresh wall. They stood dark with a red sheen that came out when the sun reached them. The one-room schoolhouse sat near the cottonwoods built from those boards and a window taken from a foreclosed shop. The chalkboard leaned easy against the front wall, its frame made from a plank that had carried smoke and now carried the weight of words. Children came from ranches and town and the orphanage at the far bend. They filed in with hair combed flat and knees scabbed. Nora stood at the front with her palms chalked white. She drew a long, gentle curve and named it. She wrote metaphor on the board and turned. Jonah sat in the second row and let himself raise a hand first because he liked the way the air felt when he reached into it without flinching. Luke tried to sit still and failed, then raised his hand anyway and smiled when she called on him. Daisy sat in the corner on a small chair and held Button with the fixed eye. She traced letters with the tip of one finger on the doll's cloth leg. Nora read to them from a book with thin pages and a seam that had been mended more than once. She did not lift her voice much. They leaned forward to hear the quiet parts. She taught them their names in ink and how to keep account of beans and boards with numbers that held. She made a space for silence and watched them learn how to fill it with thought and not fear. Evenings belonged to the house at Grady Basin. The kitchen smelled like stew and cornbread. The tin of lemon and honey sat back of the cups, its lid worn smooth by use. Nora coughed once and then did not. Jonah brought in a length of wire and showed where a fence sagged. Asa nodded and clapped him on the shoulder. Luke attempted to teach a goat to halt, and the goat trotted on with a sense of humor. Daisy climbed into Asa's lap with a picture book that had few words. He read them all slow and certain, moving his finger under letters. When a hard word came, he paused for a beat and pressed his cheek to Daisy's hair while he found the sound and set it free. When the house fell quiet, Asa stepped onto the porch. Nora sat with her hands around a cup that had gone warm and then cool again. The sky wore a color that did not have a name. Fence rails ran away into the dusk and came back again as shadows. Crickets took up their duty. A single star learned how to be seen. Asa did not speak. He moved the chair half a foot so his shoulder touched hers. She slid her hand into his, the plane left into the plane, right the way they had learned to work together with nails and ledgers and the breath of a small child. His grip closed without weight, that pressed only weight that held. The boards under their feet kept a memory of fire in a way that made the lamplight richer when it fell on them. Out beyond the cottonwoods, the creek kept its voice low. The night took its time. Inside on a chair by the door, the rabbit booklet waited, with its folded cover, smoothed flat, and its story known by heart. In the window glass, the couple's reflection made a single shape where two people sat and watched the dark become gentle. The porch chair creaked once and settled. Their hands stayed together. The house breathed. The day let go. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story.